Welcome to this program on collecting and starting native plant seeds. I'm Larry Mellichamp. This is sponsored by the UNC Charlotte Botanical Gardens and the North Carolina Native Plant Society. And this is going to be a little background, little theoretical aspects of collecting seeds, where seeds come from, what you need to know about seeds, and then moving over into starting those seeds and what you might need to know. And so this is a good introduction to collecting and starting native plant seeds. First, you need to know a little bit about species biology. All plants and animals too go through a life cycle. There are four basic stages in this life cycle. There's the stage of sexual reproduction, which is when flowers are produced and the act of cross-pollination takes place. And proper pollination leads to the production of fruits with seeds. So that's the second stage. And this is the stage of dispersal, and the seeds ripen, and then they leave the parent plant and go out into the world. The third stage in the life cycle is that of seedling germination. The seeds land in some place, and they germinate and they grow. And the fourth stage is the stage of maintenance and growth, which we're not concerned with right now. We're hardly concerned with seedling dispersal right now, although we'll be seeing some aspects of that. But the seed is the unit here. The seed is the magic unit that all plants produce. The seed is a dormant structure. It has an embryo down inside. That embryo is supplied with food in one way or another, food for the embryo. This is sealed up inside of a seed coat, and that seed coat keeps the seed from drying out and may or may not have something to do with dispersal and dormancy. And so all of that varies seed by seed. But that's your unit that we're talking about, is the production of a seed. That is, over here you see the seeds have fluffy parachutes on them for dispersal. This seed over here looks like a grain of corn, which has to be eaten by a bird or an animal. So what we're interested in is getting seeds and getting those seeds collected so that we, the humans, have control over their germination. So where do seeds come from? Well, the unit of reproduction, sexual reproduction in plants, is the flower. So here you see this famous, well-known diagram of a flower. Flowers have four basic parts: sepals, petals for attracting pollinators, stamens. These are the male part of the flower where pollen is produced in the anther. And then in the middle of the flower is what we know of as the pistil, also known as the carpel. Carpel is the unit of the pistil that is the female part of the flower. And down in the bottom of this pistil somewhere is the ovary, and it has ovules in the ovary, and those ovules are unfertilized seeds. So down in here would be ovules, and the pistil would have a stigma and a style, and it allows for fertilization of those eggs from sperm, from the pollen grains. So here's a typical flower. This is a primitive flower. This is the common tulip poplar. It has a fairly large flower. It has these green sepals and these colorful petals. There are numerous stamens in here that make abundant pollen. In the center of the flower is the female unit or pistil, and it's made up of many separate units that, after pollination and fertilization, they're going to turn into fruits. So here's a little cone-like structure of separate little fruits that the tulip poplar produces, and each one of these little units has a seed. They would ripen in the fall. Now, pollination is an integral part of this sexual reproduction. The plant makes the flower, the plant makes its pollen, the plant makes its pistil, so it has its eggs and sperm. But the plant needs a vector, an agent, to carry the pollen from one flower to the other, and that's where insects and hummingbirds come in. So pollination is part of this. Here you can see that taking place on this large Formosa lily, where the the white petals attract pollinators, in this case moths, and the stamens. Here's the close-up of the flower with the male stamens producing pollen and the female stigma that receives the pollen. Without a pollinator, this pollen would not get onto that stigma. So some animal or human, if humans are doing the pollination, have to take pollen from the stigmas of one plant. They take pollen from the anthers of one plant and put it on the stigma in the flower of another plant. And that's called cross-pollination. So insects do this very well. They go from flower to flower, collecting pollen and or nectar. In the case of bees, they collect pollen and nectar. In the case of butterflies and hummingbirds, they're after the sweet, sugary nectar. But in the process of eating, of collecting pollen or nectar, the animal carries pollen. And after pollination, if pollination is successful, and if pollen grains, as we'll see in a minute, grow down into the pistil and pollinate the ovules, a fruit develops. So a fruit, botanically, a fruit is a ripened ovary with seeds. You normally think of fruits from the grocery store as an apple or an orange or a peach, something you pick up and just bite into and eat. But botanically, all structures that make seeds are fruits. So we'll be using the word fruit in the botanical sense as a seed bearing, seed producing, seed protecting, seed dispersing unit. The fruit is an integral part of producing and dispersing seeds. So here's a common spring blooming columbine. The flower is beautifully colored, red and yellow. It attracts hummingbirds. And as you can see here, the flower gives rise to the fruit. This is the fruit. These are the 4 sections of the fruit, 4 or 5 sections, sometimes 6 in a columbine. When those seeds, as the fruit ripens and the seeds mature, a time will come when the seeds can come out of the fruit and be dispersed. And this usually happens within about a month. Columbine is a fast maturing producer of seeds, so it might bloom in March and it might be dispersing its seeds at the end of April. So if you're collecting columbine seeds, you have to be aware of that rapid time span moving along. The seeds here are kind of small. These do not require cold treatment. They'll germinate later that same year if you sow them. Southern magnolia, another example. Large flower, sometimes big as a dinner plate. Petals attract pollinators. Down in the center of the flower are the male and female parts. Here are you see the stigmas there in the middle of the flower. They're receiving, they mature and are receptive to pollen. They fluff up and have little sticky hairs on them. And then the stamens down here haven't shed pollen yet, but they will the second day. So this keeps the flower from self-pollinating. Successful cross-pollination results in a cone of little fruit units, and each fruit unit has a seed that turns red. And what's interesting about magnolia is these seeds actually hang out on these little threads, which is like the umbilical cord attaching the seed to the parent plant. Birds come along and pick these off when they ripen in the fall. This is just a pretty picture of some columbine stamens. Here are the stamens shedding pollen abundantly. Here are the stigmas receiving pollen. In the next picture, of course, the hummingbird is the agent that moves the pollen to the stigmas. Presumably, they're bringing in pollen from another flower. These flowers do not want to pollinate themselves. They want to have pollen brought in from another flower. Here's just a pretty picture, a close-up of the stigmas of a flower with pollen grains to give you a view of the relative difference in size. Pollen grains are quite tiny. Each of those pollen grains has a sperm inside. So here's a picture of pollen grains on the surface of stigmas. This is a highly magnified picture. You can see the pollen grains are here, and they're on the surface of the stigma of a flower, which is this whole structure. And if the pollen grains are happy there, if the chemistry is right, if the flower stigma recognizes its pollen grain, if you put columbine pollen on a magnolia stigma, it's not going to germinate. You got to have the right species on the right stigma. But when that happens, the pollen grain grows a pollen tube, and these penetrate down through the stigma and into the ovary. So this is a highly magnified image down inside of an ovary. And here are ovules. These are unfertilized eggs, and they're inside the ovary. And here's a rare picture of a pollen tube coming down and entering the ovary. And you can see here the point of penetration of the pollen tube into the ovule, fertilizing the egg. And then when this happens effectively, the seeds start to develop. In effect, the flower becomes pregnant. The unfertilized ovules are now fertilized. They have an embryo inside that start developing seeds, and the fruit starts developing. So that's basically the womb, and that fruit is going to hold and protect the seeds as they develop inside of the down in the. And of course, the petals fade away, and the sepals may cover up the fruit while it develops, but action is going on down in there. And just like with animals, every animal takes a certain amount of time to mature their fertilized eggs that turn into babies. And plants are the same way. Their seeds, sometimes they grow fast, like it might take a few weeks or a month for things like columbine. And in other cases, like an apple seeds are pollinated in May, and the seeds ripen in October when you eat an apple and you spit the seeds out. Sometimes it takes 6 months. So a lot of people ask, when I got to collect seeds from plants in the garden, when would I not get fruits and seeds? You don't always get successful fruits with seeds in them. What are some reasons not? Well, the first reason is that back when the flowers were in bloom, they may not have gotten cross-pollinated. There might have been no pollinators around for some reason. Might have been rainy, cold, windy, just a bad day or a bad week. We've all had those. So the plant might not get cross-pollinated that year. And no seeds, no fruits. The second reason is, for most native plants, you've got to have two different genetic individuals present. So you've got to have cross-pollination. Pollen from one flower on one plant has to be taken to the flower on a different plant of the same species. Self-pollination doesn't work very well for most native plants. There are exceptions to this, of course, but as a general rule, you need several plants to cross-pollinate each other. The third reason you might not get fruits is that you did get fruits and something came along and ate them. A caterpillar, a bird, a beetle. There are insects out there eating young fruits all the time, just like we eat young pea pods, and we eat young okra pods, and we eat young fruit, we eat young squash. So we're the biggest culprit of garden plants, of course. We're eating the young fruits, but the same thing can happen in nature. Something could eat them. And the fourth reason you might not get fruits and seeds is because they came and went and you missed them. Like with columbine, they can bloom in March, ripen their fruits, disperse their seeds within 4 to 6 weeks. And you might just not be there paying attention. So timing is everything. You've got to tune in to the plants that you're trying to collect seed from, because they have their timing that they go through. Now, there are four kinds of fruits. Here's where you need to understand the four types of fruits and their seeds, so that you can talk about them and think about how you need to deal with them. So there's four kinds of fruits. There are fruits that can have one seed per fruit. The fruits that can have many seeds per fruit. There are fruits that can be dry when they're mature, like a pod, a lily pod, or an okra pod, or you can have fruits that are fleshy or juicy, as we call it, when they ripen, like a tomato, a blueberry, a pineapple, um, anything that's fleshy. Um, and so here's some examples of those. When you combine the dry or fleshy with the one or many seeds, you get four types of fruits. The first type is the nut, grain, or achene. Nuts are things like pecans, walnuts, filberts, true nuts. Grains are what come from grasses and sedges, grasses like corn, wheat, barley, rye. They make single dry fruits that have one seed inside. And then the most famous category are the achenes. These are the seeds of all members of the sunflower family. The asters, the rudbeckias, the echinaceas, the black-eyed Susans, the coneflowers. All of those things produce one-seeded fruits. Those are called achenes. If your fruit is fleshy with one seed, it's called a drupe. And there'll be one seed down in the middle, and it'll be surrounded by a bony pit. And these would be your stone fruits: peach, plum, cherry, apricot, those familiar grocery store fruits. Well, out in the wild, you get the same sorts of things. You get wild cherries and wild plums, and many other native plants that only have one seed in a fleshy fruit. The fleshy fruit, of course, is meant for some animal to come along and pick the fruit, eat the fleshy part, and throw away the pit. That's how the seed gets dispersed. Then you have dry fruits that have many seeds, like a capsule or a pod. Lily pods. This is shown here is a poppy pod. There are hundreds of seeds down inside of there. And as the pod dries out and the seeds ripen, they shake out a few seeds at a time. And you have to know when to collect those and how to get the seeds out. And then there are the fleshy fruits with many seeds. And these are called berries. They're called berries botanically because that's what botanists name them. So a berry is any fleshy, multi-seeded fruit: a watermelon, a cucumber, a squash, a tomato, a blueberry. So some of these berries we call berries, but botanists call them all berries because they're multi-seeded. So you have to know about that. If you're collecting seeds from a watermelon, you'd have to take special precautions to get those seeds out and then discard the fleshy part, which isn't going to be around very long. And normally you would eat it, spit the seeds out. That's what happens in the wild. So I'm going to give you an example of each of these. The achene, the corn, the grain, all grasses and sedges. You get one fruit and one seed. Sunflower, same way. The fruit is an achene. And here you see the head of sunflower seeds forming over here. These are actually sunflower fruits, each fruit of which came from one flower. Here's the little flowers. So one seed, one flower. And then after they ripen, they come off of this big head. They're the seeds. You can buy those as unshelled seeds, or you can buy them as shelled seeds. So those are all members of the sunflower family. Have these single seeded fruits that would be called achenes. So here's some examples in the Aster family: the big-leaved aster with tiny little seeds. Here's some sort of, remember the aster family here that has parachutes attached to the seeds for dispersal like this. So there's the fruit, which also contains the seed, and that floats away on a parachute of bristles. And here they are when you're collecting them. And if you left them on the plant, they would blow away in the sea. Then there's the capsule, a dry fruit with many seeds. So a typical lily that you've seen both as garden lilies or as wild lilies. If you look down inside of the lily capsule, you'll find the seeds down in there all neatly stacked up like Pringles potato chips. And they shake out as the wind blows during the winter. So a few seeds at a time will be shaken out. They're flat, and they have no parachutes. They have no, birds might eat them, but probably not. They mostly just get shaken out and blown by the wind. Here's a familiar example of the okra pod. We eat them when they're quite young. If you waited for these to mature, they'd be so hard you wouldn't be able to eat them. And so we eat them when they're immature, and down inside, they're the seeds forming in there. Here's a common example. The milkweed forms a pod. That pod dries out and opens up. And down inside are dozens, if not 100 seeds. And they all come out with a fluffy parachute that carries them away. Here pods are produced by spring wildflowers, a bleeding heart. For example, here's the pod down here. And it just takes a few weeks to ripen. Same way with bloodroot. And down inside are many seeds. They ripen very quickly in the spring. And a peculiarity here is that each one of these seeds has a little fleshy protein body on it called an eleosome. And those, when these fall out on the ground, those are picked up by ants and are carried. So ants are very important as dispersal agents for spring wildflowers as the seeds are laying out on the floor of the forest. If you want to grow these, you've got to be there when they ripen and collect them quickly because the ants will come get them. And they have to be can't let them dry out. They have to quickly get into the ground. Then on to berries. Berries are fleshy fruits. At maturity, they're fleshy or juicy. They have many seeds. The tomato is a very good example of that. The blueberry, very good example of that. Here you can see the little seeds forming in there. You can feel those with your teeth when you eat a blueberry. Little seeds might get caught in your teeth. And you spit them out. And that's what the blueberry wants you to do. It either wants you to spit the seeds out or it wants the seeds to pass through your digestive tract and be deposited somewhere along the way as you're moving through the habitat. Bears, of course, are the big eaters of blueberries, and some birds. Winterberry holly, a great bird dispersed fruit. Anything that turns red in the wintertime is for birds. So each one of these holly berries has one, usually up to 5 seeds inside. And the bird eats the berry and passes the seeds through its digestive tract unharmed, ready for germination. Pumpkins, gourds, melons of all kinds. These are really large berries. Berries, nevertheless, these happen to have thick rind, which means some big animal has to come, open them up and eat them. In the wild, this could be a grazing animal or a deer or some other large animal. These things come from Africa, so I don't know what eats them in the wild. Thank goodness they don't grow in trees. More closer to home are buckeye. Red buckeye, bottlebrush buckeye. These form fleshy berries that really don't have a whole lot of juice in them, but they're berries nevertheless. Each one of these units has 2 to 3 seeds in it, or maybe 1 to 3 seeds, and they open up and out come the seeds and they fall on the ground and squirrels get them. The drupes, these are your stone fruits, peach, plums, and cherries. You can see the fleshy so-called mesocarp. This would be the part that we eat. And the endocarp is the pit that we don't eat. And down inside of that pit, if you open the pit up, there's the seed down inside of there. And the plant doesn't want you eating the seed, it just wants you to eat the outer part. So it protects the seed in that bony, hard endocarp. And y'all know about not eating peach pits. The almond is a commercial seed that we eat. It has to be shelled out of the endocarp. Cherries, we don't eat cherry seeds particularly. And so cherries, you collect the fruits. Here's ripening cherry fruits, and you mash the fruits out on a paper towel. And here are the seeds then mashed out of the fleshy part. In the wild, these would be eaten by birds, and the birds would digest the fleshy part, and the seed would pass through their digestive tract. But if you are collecting these, and you've got to clean the seeds and get the flesh off of them so the seeds can germinate. Jack in the pulpit, same way. The little units of these fleshy fruits has one seed per fleshy fruit. So these would kind of be like drupes, little small drupes or druplets. And you'd have, there'd be one seed. Each one of these is a seed down inside each one of these Jack in the pulpit fruits. So keep in mind that fruits ripen seasonally. You got your summer fruits, your fall fruits, your spring fruits. The fruits go through color changes from green to red to black sometimes, or just dark red, and birds know to come and eat them as they ripen. You would do the same thing. You would need to learn when that fruit is ripe, when you can collect it. If it's fleshy, you got to quickly clean it, get the seed out of the fruit. Fruits ripen sequentially. So here's an arum. You can see the fruits are ripening from top to bottom, turning from green to orange as they ripen. And the birds pick them off as they ripen. You can do that same thing. As they turn colors, you can collect them. So just in review here, the fruiting seasons, you've got your spring fruits where seeds are produced by spring wildflowers, and you've got to be Johnny on the spot to collect those early in the year. And then some of these small seeds like columbine, foam flower that bloom in the spring, those seeds will germinate later that same year if you plant them. Or you can keep them for a year and keep them dry. Then you've got your summer fruits like cherry, peach, blackberries, raspberries, blueberries. As you know, these don't last very long. They're very sugary. You've got to collect them, clean them, get the seeds out, or else they'll rot. Then you've got your fall fruits that are nutritious for migrating birds, dogwood, black gum, and then buckeyes for squirrels and things. These fall fruits ripen early in the fall and have to be collected and dealt with. Then you got your winter fruits that last into the winter. You can collect those anytime. Hollies, mistletoe, viburnums. There's about 20 species of things that are wintertime. And then keep in mind, I'll keep reminding you, most of our native seeds need overwintering stratification. They need a chilling period, a cold period, 40 days at 40 degrees before they'll germinate. Seed sizes, we'll notice this when I show you some examples later. They can be really tiny, almost like dust, like cardinal flower, poppy, gentians, orchids. Some of these are almost like dust. They can be small, like columbine and aster. They can be medium sized, like a bloodroot or a sunflower or a trillium. They can be large, cherry, blackberry, dogwood, viburnum, magnolia. They can be very large, like an acorn or a silver bell, or they can be extra large or gigantic, like a buckeye or a walnut. These can be the size of golf balls sometimes. So you've got all kinds of seed sizes to deal with, and this has to do with the individual plant's way of life. To start seeds, the basic principles are you find them at the right time, you collect them when they're ripe, you clean them, you get rid of the dry chaff or the parachutes or the seed pod or whatever. You clean the seeds from the fruits. You can either store them if that's your purpose, or you can treat them. If they're thick, if they have thick seed coats, you can scarify them or nick them with a razor blade or rub them with sandpaper or treat them with acid. Then you sow them in a pot or outdoors in the ground, and they go through a chilling period, which is 95% of the time necessary, 40 degrees for 40 days. You could put them in the refrigerator, you could leave them outside, and they would germinate in the spring. If you don't know the treatments for a particular seed, you got to look those up in one of the many books that are available on starting seeds. Just as an aside, just as the seeds need chilling to make them grow, plants themselves, the actual plant, needs a chilling period to break dormancy. So native plants do not make good house plants at all. You cannot bring in your Christmas ferns and your phloxes and your bloodroots and things and expect them to grow well indoors. They need to be outside also for the 40 days at 40 degrees. So finally, just a few pictures of the stages that you might go. You might collect the seeds at the right time. You can use any number of containers, a bucket, a cup, paper bag, a plastic bag, any kind of container you have. I try to carry little paper envelopes or plastic bags with me when I'm out in case I want to collect some seeds that are ripe. Sometimes it's hard to get back to a spot. Then I use screens of various kinds. I put the seeds or the fruits in here and would rub them around to separate the chaff from the seed. The small seed would fall through the screen. You can get different sizes of screens. I like kitchen sieves where you can separate the seed from the chaff. Sometimes the seed falls through, sometimes the chaff falls through. You can wash them, do all kinds of things with sieves for treating seeds. Seeds that you're going to save or use for seed exchange, once they're cleaned and dried, you can put them in the little paper envelopes and always label them. If you're going to store seed for a long time, you might want to store them in an airtight jar in the refrigerator or an airtight jar on the shelf. Here you have to look up the seed and see whether it can live for several years dry or whether you need to keep it cold. Then you sow. You can sow them in pots on soil. A tiny seed, you don't cover them. You just let them trickle down into the soil. You water them, you label them, you set them aside. You put them out where they can chill, or you set them where they're going to, if they're going to germinate soon, you set them where they're going to germinate. Some seeds, particularly your garden plants, which don't have a dormancy period, you can germinate those with a little extra heat. Native plants don't so much benefit from the heat. They tend to come up as spring warms up, but you could push some along with a little extra heat if you had a little greenhouse or a place to grow some things. Here again, you look up the species to see when it's going to germinate. If you're growing rhododendrons and azaleas and columbine and cardinal flower, those germinate without a cold period. So a little heat in the fall and winter could help them come along, as could extra lighting. So that's about it. Places to look things up. There are lots of books. Of course, you can look on the internet if you want to try to plow through all the data. My favorite single book is William Kalina's 2008 book, Guide to Growing and Propagating Wildflowers. I consider that the ultimate. My book has some native plants of the Southeast, the briefest of instructions on how to germinate seeds. The North Carolina Native Plant Society has a wonderful little propagation manual from 2001. It might be available somewhere. It has brief instructions on a whole lot of different seeds on what to do. If you're doing woody plants, Michael Durr and his book, Reference Manual of Woody Plant Propagation, is the Bible for looking up treatment for woody plant seeds. Harry Phillips, one of the earliest books from 1985, Growing and Propagating Wildflowers, covers a good many of the most popular wildflowers at that time. It tells you how to propagate. And then I like Jan Midgley's little books, Southeastern Wildflowers. She has a little book for each state, and that tells you the germination requirements for each of the plants that she deals with. So there's just some of the books, and of course there are other books that you can look in. So that's the end. I hope this has been helpful to get your mind set on where seeds come from, what seeds are, the different types of seeds and fruits. You know, seeds are produced inside of fruits. Fruits help ripen the seeds, and then you've got to know what to do to get those seeds ready for germination. That's the end. So long.